Hello, I'm Dr. Anthony Wuta, and I currently serve as the Provost and Chief Academic Officer here at Howard University. It is certainly my pleasure to welcome you to this panel discussion entitled Why the Midterms Matter. If you're like me, you're probably tired of seeing all the political ads on TV and the commercials that we see between every show. And what you may have noticed is that they are increasingly aggressive and increasingly divisive. I've had recently an individual I respect a great deal say these are the most important elections in our lifetime, and there are a number of reasons why. And so I'm pleased to welcome our panel today to really discuss why the midterms matter. I'm also pleased that we have as our moderator Dr. Keneisha Grant, Associate Professor in the College of Arts and Sciences in the Department of Political Science. And so please join me in welcoming our panel and Dr. Grant.
Hello, I am Keneisha Grant, an Assistant Professor of Political Science at Howard University, here today to facilitate a conversation about the midterm elections. By now, you have likely heard about the elections or come into contact with some political advertising, as Dr. Wuta mentioned. Many of you have participated in early voting. The Office of the President has assembled this panel of dynamic, intelligent, powerhouse Black women, and I'm very happy that we are a panel of Black women here on the historic campus of Howard University to think through and talk through the issues of the day. We have here with us Dr. Ayana Best, who is an Assistant Professor of Political Science at Howard University. We have Ms. Bass Williams, who owns a company where she connects conservatives to other individuals across the Republican Party and across the American political landscape. And we have Alaina Beverly, a noted Democratic strategist who frequently appears on national television, helping Americans understand the nuances of American politics. Welcome to Howard University, and thank you to all of you for being available for this important conversation.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Welcome also to our viewing audiences, live and in person, who are joining us via the WHUT YouTube page. Let's get started. Dr. Best, we are at a college campus, and it is the case that some of these individuals in the audience might be participating in their first election. So I want you to briefly describe the nuts and bolts of this. What do we mean when we say midterm election, and why do we call these elections by that name? Are these elections different in some way than other elections? Can you just set the scene for us about what is happening?
Yes, so we refer to the midterm elections primarily because they're right in the middle of the presidential term. So these elections are different from the presidential elections and other smaller elections that we may see, because this is when we decide who will control our legislative body. The Democrats will continue to hold control of the House of Representatives as well as the Senate, and now they also the White House. But this can go either way. There are a number of swing states that will determine whether or not we see a Republican shift in power, and whoever is in power and control will have the authority to set the legislative agenda for us for the next 2 years.
Thank you. Ms. Bass Williams, people in the media are suggesting, as Dr. Wuta just mentioned, that this is the most important election of our lifetime. But that's something we seem to hear every election season. At least I think I hear it every election season. And so I want you to talk to us about whether or why this midterm season is more important than others, if that's true at all.
You know, we do hear every 2 years that this is the most important election. And I actually believe that every election is more important than the one before. I think that because of things that are on the ballot or things that are certainly forefront in the minds of American voters, this is really truly a critical election. We have, of course, the overturn of Roe versus Wade, inflation at historic levels, a war in Ukraine that certainly has an impact on what's happening in U.S. economies. So yes, this is a hugely important election, and I would argue that it is possibly, I'm not going to go there. I don't like to do extremes, but it is, without a doubt, it is extremely important. And I am excited to be here with young voters because people often write this age population off as not concerned, but we have a large group of people here today who I think will be at the polls if they've not already done so. So I do think it's an important election.
Thank you. I sure hope they will go to the polls if they haven't already, and have a good excuse for not going if they didn't go. Ms. Beverly, we are at Howard University, as we have talked about. And at Howard University, we like to teach our students whatever we're teaching them. So I'm a political scientist, as is Dr. Best. We do political science, but we also do Blackness, right? So whatever we're talking about, we talk about it in terms of Blackness as well. And so I want to ask you, we have this idea that this midterm election is an important midterm election, but is it especially important for Black people? Or is there something that we should be thinking about specifically while we're here on the campus of Howard University as it pertains to this set of elections?
Sure. Well, look, we know for midterm elections, the turnout is typically lower for any midterm election. So this, in addition to this being a critical election, it also it is very important because we know the turnout tends to be low and there's so much at risk. And I do think that there is so much at risk for the country. And if the country gets a cold, then Black folks get pneumonia. We know that this legislative agenda has not given us everything that we wanted. We did get some things. We got the infrastructure bill, right? We got the stimulus package for a number of families, for Black families in particular. Getting money in the pocket right after COVID hit us was really, really critical. We got that advance. We got that accomplishment. We got the student loan relief. That also is important to Black students and Black families. However, there's more that needed to be done, and we have to think about what the contrast is. If we elect, or if we lose the majority in the House and the Senate, we will basically have a lame duck administration. There will be no further accomplishments that can be had for the Black community or for our communities writ large, right? I find it hard to believe that a Republican majority, that Republican leadership, Kevin McCarthy, Mitch McConnell, I find it hard to believe that they see Black people. I honestly find it hard to believe that their legislative agenda would take our interests so squarely into account. And part of why we can say that is because we've heard promises of, for example, a national reform to overturn Roe, not leave it to the states, but actually have a legislative agenda that would overturn Roe. So and abortion is also an issue for our community. We know that Black women and brown women are going to be the ones who have to leave their states in order to go to another state to have their reproductive health recognized and acknowledged. And so I do think that there's a lot at stake when it comes to a legislative agenda if we are to lose the majority in the House and the Senate.
Thank you. I'm glad you brought up Roe v. Wade because this is kind of a segue into what I wanted to talk about next. Dr. Best, for some of us, it feels like the summer was a lifetime ago, particularly maybe for some people in the audience who were like at home when the summer started and are now here like in the throes of a semester. My question is, can you kind of help us understand what we are talking about when we talk about the overturn of Roe v. Wade? In particular, I think if you could explain what we see or understand about this being, or Roe v. Wade, sending this decision back to the states.
Yes, so I think it's important to put in a context how we got here, and thinking about the last time that Republicans had control of both the House of Representatives and the Senate. They were able to make sure that a lot of Supreme Court seats were blocked off so that when Trump got into office, they were able to put conservative judges in those seats. And now we see that the Supreme Court is primarily a conservative court with, I believe it's 5-4 right now. So that was how the Supreme Court was able to overturn Roe v. Wade in the first place. And now we see that Democrats, if they remain in control, will try to codify Roe v. Wade and make some universal protections for abortion rights for all states. But we also may see where Republicans will likely put some more federal restrictions or limitations on abortion access. And this is a health crisis and an issue that will be important to understand going into these elections.
Yes.
You know, I think this is the thing that I enjoy most about these kinds of conversations is because I think that it shows so clearly that Black women are not a monolith, the Black community is not a monolith, and so I have a great deal of respect for my sisters on the stage, but I strongly disagree with most of what they've said. And I say that because when you say that, like, we talk about what Republicans have done to destroy the Black community. And for me, you know, I worked on my very first campaign when I was 11 years old. That was before your parents even thought about you, okay? So that was over 40 years ago. And we helped to elect the first Black woman to the city council in my hometown, Columbus, Georgia. She happened to be a Black Republican woman. And so my politics have, my life has been conservative and my politics have been conservative. And so when I think of the thing, like the advantages, like the promises made by loyalty to the left and the promises that have not been kept, like for 40 years, 47 years, Biden has been in elected office, and if we have had such great results from Democrats, then there wouldn't be this huge wage gap, in my view. And we talk about things like abortion. Black women represent 13% of the population. We represent over 30% of the babies being aborted. In most years in New York City, there are more Black babies aborted than born alive. And so for me, the issue is the voting bloc in the Black community, the babies that are not here. And as it relates to Roe, we have to understand that when we have fair conversations about Roe, we're not talking about the 1% of babies that are born through incest or rape. We're not talking about the 1% that are born, that are aborted in the final trimesters. We're talking about babies. And so for me and for many women, both
babies by your standard.
Right. For many women, both Black and white, they actually believe that this thing that lives inside of a woman's womb, that it actually is a human life. And so so people across the country right now want to have an honest conversation about abortion, about what the left likes to call reproductive justice. But people like me, we call it abortion because we believe that what lives inside of a woman's womb is actually a human, and it should have a voice. And
at the point of conception and over the rights of a woman.
But we're talking about, and so this is what we also want to do. We want to have fair and honest conversations about abortion. And so I actually do believe that life begins at conception, but most people don't. So what I'm willing to do is I'm willing to have an honest conversation and sit down with my legislators, with men and women, to talk about when is it actually a life. And if there's ever a point when I can say that what is inside of that womb is a life, then somebody has to protect it. And just let me say this, there was a time when people would say, oh, I don't want to own slaves. It's all right if you own slaves. If what is living inside of the woman's womb is actually a human life, then it is up to me as a human who believes that life matters to protect it. So I'm willing to, if I'm willing to have reasonable conversations about, like, is it at 8 months? Should we be, is it justice to abort a child at 8 months? And so these conversations are the thing, this is what Americans are talking about right now as it relates to Roe. And it's not just the white women who some people call roaches, like Sunny Hostin on The View, call roaches, who are voting for, who see this as unreasonable, but it's Black women. In affinity group polls, like with Black Women's Roundtable in Essence, 65% of Black women said that they would not vote for Democrats in this midterm. In 2018, 92% of Black women voted for Democrats. So I'm just willing to have an honest conversation about when it is life. And if it's ever, at any point, if it is actually a life in there, then somebody's got to speak for it.
So I want to hear from Ms. Beverly, but I also want to kind of think about some of the things you said. In particular, if I understand Roe properly, we had a definition of a time. When I'm past the time currently, but we had a definition of when that was. So I'd be interested to hear from you, Ms. Beverly, about this in general, but in particular about this like massive response that we saw when Roe got overturned. So how do we like know what's right? Like, how do we know what women actually want? Do we call every woman? Do we poll them? Do we put a question on the census? Because I think a part of the point that you're making is that it's not very clear exactly what's right, when life starts, what women want, but the images that we get suggest otherwise. Some of the legislation that we had previously suggests otherwise. So, Ms. Beverly, I'm interested to hear what you think on this subject.
So sadly, I don't have the polling at my fingertips when it comes to how Black women are feeling about the right to bodily integrity. But I will say that we do know that the ban on abortion predominantly affects women of color and those who are low income. It's going to be people who rely on this process to be able to ensure their own health. Maternal mortality is a real thing. What we learned from Roe v. Wade, from the actual Supreme Court case, was that a woman should have the right to determine what happens to her body. She should not be forced to carry a child to term. She should not be forced. You, from your perspective, life begins at conception before a woman may even know that she is pregnant. But so she is then required to take something to term, and that decision comes from someone who, at this point, didn't have the benefit of having to run on that platform. So if we remove it from the Supreme Court, it goes to the states. The states many of the states had trigger laws that automatically, as soon as Roe was struck down, automatically enacted an abortion ban. So the women in that state didn't even have the right to determine whether or not they would have abortion as part of an option for them in terms of bodily health. And in states where, was it Kansas recently, where there was a ballot initiative and there was an opportunity to try to protect, or when the opportunity was given to protect that right, women stood up and said, we want it protected. And so what we're seeing is the ability for elected officials to actually be voted in or out based on where they're going to stand on this issue, as opposed to other states that have gone in automatically with trigger laws. But tell me, speak more to it.
Yeah, I am going to do my job today and straddle the middle. But I will say that as my students know, I'm pregnant. I am 17 weeks pregnant currently. And this baby was conceived via IVF. And so if there's any person in the room probably who has recently been left with the question of when life begins, I think it's me, because in IVF you see day to day what the changes are. I don't think that we will be able to get to resolution here in this conversation. And I would encourage everybody to think about what their own personal things are. My own, having been through this lately, still leaves me with the idea that women should have the right to choose, like women should be able to do what they want. But again, I'm supposed to be on the straight and narrow, so we'll do that.
And I'm a professional aunt, no kids, a pank. I don't have kids, don't want kids, but I do understand, like for me, it is this idea about life. If it actually is life, and I'm willing to have a conversation with anyone about life, and in the same way that I believe that this is an issue that has many women who happen to be Black are finding themselves in this, recognizing that we have been the community most disadvantaged by abortion. I'm sorry. I look at communities like Planned Parenthood, like organizations like Planned Parenthood that have preyed on Black communities in a way that I find it a profit center for abortion.
Planned Parenthood is a primary source of health care and health resources in our community, more so than
let me interject, because we could talk about this for the whole hour, and I'm getting notes that we should not do that. I'm going to move on to a question about the economy. Dr. Best,
if Planned Parenthood did anything other than abortion,
scholars have to say about the role of the economy in political decision making among voters? Is it possible that we can make some predictions about the way that economic conditions today may influence the way people vote?
Sorry, can you
Repeat the question.
No problem.
For all of us.
We are pivoting a bit to talk about the economy, and I want to know whether political scientists have some theories or some way that we can understand how the current state of the economy might influence the way people show up at polls and how they vote.
Yes. Thank you for repeating the question. So I do see in political science that we rely a lot on our polls, and we know that inflation is a very, very big topic for not only American voters, but specifically for African Americans, because we do have to think about the minimum wage and it not being a living wage for some standards of what that means, and not being able to afford groceries and things like gas at the time. So voters are going to want to go to the polls and vote for candidates who have real actionable items to tackle inflation, as well as hopefully provide more jobs and economic stability in the next elections.
Thank you. This question is for Ms. Bass-Williams. There's been a disagreement within the parties about what's happening in the U.S. economy. Some on the right place the blame for inflation and high prices squarely at the feet of President Biden. Some on the left argue that these economic issues are affecting nations across the globe following the COVID-19 shutdowns. What's your take on the current state of the economy as a political issue, and how should we understand the party's positioning on this issue?
Okay, so first of all, I have to openly say that I am not an economist. That is not my area of expertise. I use a calculator to add everything. It's like that's not where I live at all. I will say that, let me just give you this example. I went into my refrigerator yesterday and I saw 2 cartons of eggs, which means that my husband went to the grocery store and got eggs when I already bought eggs. And I'm asking him, do you think we're the Rockefellers? What are you doing? That is where most Americans are right now. So even if, like, I don't know how we got here, but what I do know is that in this space of selective outrage, if we were here under a Republican administration, all of the blame would be on Republicans. It would not be Ukraine. It would not be the previous administration. It would not be supply thing, all of these things. Republicans would take all the brunt. And I think that an honest assessment of the way the media views things, we would know that it would be the Republicans' fault. So now here we are, 2 cartons of eggs in the refrigerator, understanding that we really need 1, right? And so how we got here, I don't know that anyone on this panel is able to explain how we got here. I hope that somebody can, because I don't know. But what we have is an administration that has continued. The reason the Biden administration is losing on this issue is because they have continued to deflect and pretend that there are other reasons. And so even so far as to redefine the word recession, I know I have friends who are like, you're always doing the whataboutism, what if it were the other team, right? But I know that if a Republican press secretary had stood at the mic and literally redefined the word recession, all hell would have broken loose. And if we were in this state of inflation right now, under a Republican administration, just be honest. We know that it would totally be the Republicans' fault. Do the Republicans have a clear plan to get us out? I don't know that there is a clear plan, but I definitely know that whatever this blame game that President Biden is playing is not helping people who don't want to have 2 cartons of eggs because they're too expensive to be double buying eggs right now.
Okay. Ms. Beverly, the Republican approach in this election seems to focus on the economy. And as a bit of a political historian, I find this interesting because it makes me think about one of the elections when I was in grade school where Bill Clinton and James Carville had this mantra, "It's the economy, stupid," which is to say that most voters care most about the economy. Do the Republicans know something that the Democrats don't know? What do you think about this campaign strategy that the Democrats have taken to focus on other things besides the economy?
I don't think that the Republicans know something that the Democrats don't know, but I don't think that the Democrats were good at messaging what types of economic accomplishments we'd made. both from the American Rescue Plan, because we were on the brink of a recession as soon as Biden got into office, as a result of COVID-19 that blew up and exploded under the Trump administration, and all of the economic impacts and outflows from that. So we had the American Rescue Plan, we have now the Inflation Reduction Act, we have the CHIPS Act, we have initiatives like Justice 40 that are making sure that there are economic investments in communities of color and those that are called disadvantaged communities in the legislation, but communities that have been historically underserved. So I think we didn't do a good job as Democrats of messaging those accomplishments. And as soon as the Inflation Reduction Act was passed, you started to see Congress and the administration pick up that messaging. But it is a very real problem. It is at the forefront of the minds of voters. It's at the forefront of the minds of Black voters. Three out of four Black voters say that inflation and the economy are their primary motivating issue this go round. And so to the extent that we agree on anything, this is a very serious issue for voters. And that's why I think you've seen some of the most prominent surrogates for the Democratic Party, including former President Barack Obama, speaking to issues of economic woes, but talking about those accomplishments and reminding our voters what that means, what we have accomplished, and that we need more of a runway to do more.
Yeah, I want to pick up on something Dr. Bess was talking about. The political science literature suggests that if the economy is not doing well, when an election happens, people generally turn out for whoever is not in office. And so it'll be interesting to see how voters balance these things. Along those lines, I want to ask you about some of the other things that we're hearing. We're hearing that this is the most important election, but we're also hearing about some important concepts being on the ballot. The one that strikes me most is this idea that slavery is on the ballot this election cycle, which seems like a very serious statement. So Dr. Bess, most of us can't imagine people being enslaved in the year 2022. So what are people talking about when they talk about slavery being on the ballot in this election?
Yes, so there are 5 states currently who still have in their state constitution language that punishes citizens or convicted individuals for crimes. So they are able to be in involuntary servitude or a form of slavery because they are incarcerated at the time. And states like Alabama, Louisiana, Tennessee, Oregon, Vermont, they are voting to remove this language from their state's constitution within this election cycle.
Thank you.
But it brings up another point that there are also, in addition to the congressional races that we have been talking about, there are also a number of Secretary of State races that are on the ballot this go round, governorships that are on the ballot this go round, to say nothing of local district attorney races that are also part of this election cycle. So when we're talking about what is important to Black folks, and whether or not our votes will count, and whether or not our elections will be upheld as being legitimate when the processes are legitimate, that is also what's up for grabs in this election, because we can seat people who are themselves election deniers and don't see and will potentially not uphold the legitimacy of an election.
Okay, another thing that we're hearing in this election, particularly I think from Democrats, is that democracy is on the ballot. I want to know from both of you, what does that mean to you? What do you hear when you hear that? And is this something that voters should be worried about as they make their decisions? Or is it really a strategy to get people out to vote, to help people understand what the importance of this moment is?
So exactly, that is what I'm saying when I say that this is an issue. This is a consequential election because we have election deniers who are running for Secretary of State, right? We have election deniers who are now running for Congress. And so if they do not acknowledge the legitimacy of the 2020 outcome, it is incredibly likely that they may not acknowledge the legitimacy of 2024, of future elections. If we want our votes to count, and we want to ensure that the processes themselves are upheld, if we believe in a fair system, then it's going to be difficult if we have people who, for their own purposes and to have their own power, would strike at the core of the legitimacy of the process.
Okay, so my sister who's in the back of the room, and we created a website called justreadthedamnbill.com because we wanted to make, we're from Georgia, and we've actually been in Georgia doing some coverage, shooting and interviewing people about this midterm election. And so when SB 202 came out and all hell broke loose in the MLB, in the Major League Baseball was taken away from Georgia and taken to Colorado, we wanted to know because it was so hyperbolic, everything was in turmoil, that democracy was in peril. So we are not lawyers.
You might want to explain what SB 202 is in terms of voter ID.
This is the Georgia, the bill that passed definitely in the dark of night, apparently, that in some ways codified some of the things that had happened during COVID that needed to be actually in legislation.
Like remove drop boxes, made it so that you can't provide comfort captains in line when voting.
They did not remove drop boxes. Drop boxes were put in voting precincts, and that was something that was reported. You were no longer allowed to, just let's say that I have a group and I want to give out water. I couldn't give out water, and that was that made a lot of news, but there were also water stations that still were provided and are provided, and poll workers could give out water. So a lot of things were happening and being said about this legislation. And I'm just like, if this is true, this is outrageous. So we went and we read it, and we read it again, and we read it again. And you can go now to Just Read the Damn Bill, and there's other legislation there as well to read. But the issue with this legislation and with the way we're talking about voting is there were things that needed to be codified in law because they were, because of COVID, they did not have any actual official way to make it continue. So those things were made to continue, even early voting and all these things that people said did not exist. But also, more importantly, what we see now, the results of that, the Atlanta municipal elections that happened after that bill passed, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution reported no long lines, great voter turnout. In Georgia, right now, we see a record voter turnout. Stacey Abrams' group, and God bless her for registering people to vote. We work with the Fannie Lou Project down in Georgia and other groups, Douglas Leadership Institute, that are also invested in making sure that Black people are registered to vote. And these groups are necessary. But even Stacey Abrams' legislation that she her lawsuit was thrown out because she had over 3,000 people who said that they were not able to vote, but it was proven that they actually were able to vote. And the final thing, and this idea of election deniers, there are over 150 Democrats who still will not, who still don't concede the 2000 election, who always denied the election, and Stacey Abrams still hasn't officially conceded to Kemp in the last time she lost to him. So this idea that
about Bush v. Gore?
I'm talking about Stacey Kemp in this most recent. I mean, Stacey Abrams versus Kemp in the last election. But every election, there are people. Even Hillary Clinton is doing the media circuit now, denying the 2016. She says she didn't lose the 2016 election, and that Trump was an illegitimate president. The definition of election denier changes as the Democrats decide who they want to say denied the election. Democrats have been denying elections, according to some, since the 70s, but now there's this thing that you can't say that the person is illegitimate or else somehow you are an anti-American and democracy is in peril. To me, it's selective outrage.
Okay, I want to fill in a few blanks for the folks in the room. I know that some of you are students in state and local government, so you already know this. And I think we might be on this chapter, but the Secretary of State is important because this is a person who facilitates elections at the state level. So there's that. And to fill in a bit of context about the most recent comment, there is a fierce debate happening about the role of the Electoral College. So you hear some people suggesting that the person who wins the most votes should be the president. You hear some people suggesting that the person who wins the Electoral College should be president. We currently live in a system where the person who wins the Electoral College wins the presidency, whether they win the most votes or not. So that's the background on that. We are almost time to talk to you all about your questions. And so I think we should wrap up with this idea or this, what you all see for the future. I've learned that it's probably not the best idea to do predictions during the Trump presidency. For 4 years, I did a bunch of them. Not all of them hit. But I want to ask you what you think might happen in the election tomorrow or really in the days ahead while we wait for the vote counts if we must do so. Any predictions, Dr. Best?
So I'll say again that as a political scientist, we rely on polls and we rely on data that we get from the actual American voter. So we know that there are a record number of Black Republican candidates, but we also see in polls that Black American voters are saying that primarily, or about 70% of them, will vote for the Democratic Party. So it'll be interesting to see if that 24-25% of voters who are unsure about what political party they'll vote for will be able to, these Black Republican candidates can appeal to their vote. So I think it'll be interesting to see. I don't have any real predictions, but.
Smart woman.
I'm with you on the predictions after 2016. I will say I do think that obviously, it's no secret, most people believe that the Republicans will take the House. I actually believe that J.D. Vance and Herschel Walker will pull it out and the Republicans will squeak by on the Senate. My hope is that it will not be a runoff in Georgia, but I do think that that the Republicans will take both the House and Senate, the Senate by a hair. I will say that for me, I'm excited to see the large number of Black Republican candidates running. I'm also excited to see that Black women are making their vote, making both Democrats and Republicans work for their vote. And I personally feel like Black women should like the Democratic Party should be ours. Like we have been propping Democrats up forever, and I think that we should own the joint, right? I think that if only 70% of Black women vote for the Democrats, then the game is over. The Democrats can't win with only 70% of the Black women vote. Democrats have to have a good 90% of Black women show up and vote to win. Hispanic women are using their vote in such a way that's making everyone court them. I want Republicans to more aggressively court Black women, and I want Democrats to take Black women not take Black women for granted.
Ms. Beverly.
I have learned not to make predictions or prognostications. I am hopeful that we are going to see record turnout for this midterm election. That is the one thing that I will say, and we're seeing, because we have organizations like Collective PAC that are mobilizing our voters and making sure that our voters are getting to the polls and knocking on doors. I'm fairly certain that we will have record turnout for African American voters for this midterm.
Thank you. Now we go to the audience to see if you all have any questions. If you do have questions, you can join us at the microphone and ask those questions. You have experts from both sides of our political aisles here who can answer your questions. Come on.
Is it okay if I remove my mask real quick?
Yes.
Okay. So this is kind of going back towards the reproductive rights / abortion segment, whatever you want to call it. So I volunteered at Planned Parenthood for a couple years when I was in high school. I just want to kind of like relay the fact that Planned Parenthood is about 4% of what they did from the 2020 to 2021, I guess, year in their annual report. It was only 4% of what they did was abortion. This included like actually performing medical or surgical abortions, the aftercare, before care, the ultrasounds, because it's a whole process, especially depending on what state that you go through. But my question was, because of the view, I have two actually, because of the view of life and where it actually begins for Christianity, usually people say that it's conception, Judaism, birth, Wouldn't these laws that kind of restrict abortion access infringe on religious rights? And what about preventative measures for having abortions? I'm from Missouri, and the times that I've gone lobbying to talk about bills that promote contraceptive access, access to reproductive health care, sex education, etc., they've all been shot down by my Republican and conservative legislators, and my more liberal or Democratic legislators have been a lot more open to these conversations instead of turning us away or completely disregarding us. So what do we do about that, especially because preventative measures really would, I guess, end the amount of abortions that are going on?
That's a great question.
That's
Thank
a great
you so
question.
much.
Yes, thank you so much. And so, as it relates to the to Planned Parenthood, one thing that they do is they talk about the percentage of services that they provide versus the revenue that they generate. And so, when you go back and look at their finances, like their revenue comes from abortions. But they give out tons of condoms. They do a lot of, like, they meet with people, and but the revenue actually does come from abortions. And so, but I'm with you 100%. I think prevention is the key. We need to have, and so if Republicans in your state are not willing to sit down and talk about, some of the more extreme ways of prevention. I know that, like abstinence is a prevention, condoms is prevention. I think that that Republicans should be a part of those conversations. But for me, and I am a Christian, I have no shame in my game. I'm a Bible-believing follower of Jesus the Christ, but I'm not forcing my faith on anyone's body, right? So I have to argue this from a secular standpoint. Like in my family, in our house, we're gonna do what we think Jesus wants us to do, right? But but in terms of morality, I have to ask the question. At some point, we've got to be able to ask, when is it a life? And I'm willing to, like, I think it's a life at conception, but I'm willing to. We have to sit down and talk about, at some point, maybe it's 8 months, 29 days. That's when it's a life. But at some point, we have to decide it's a life, because it is. And if at any point we decide it's a life, I'm going to have to speak for it.
So then if there is a shift in who controls both chambers, and they pass a national ban on the right to abortion, that determines that whenever that life is decided to, whenever that life is, if it could be at conception, that life trumps the choices, the rights, the livelihood, the well-being of the person who would carry it. I would call that modern day slavery for women, right? If a life is, if that legislature decides that I don't have the right to determine whether or not I terminate a pregnancy, that means that they're deciding that child, the fetus, or perhaps even before it is, that formulation of cells is more important than what I choose to do with my life, how I handle my body, whether or not I can have opportunities that might be prevented from if I have to carry a child.
We have to make those moral decisions, and I would say that if it is in fact a life, then it should be protected. And that's, like, it doesn't matter if it's sitting there on the table. It doesn't matter if it's 3 inches up the birth canal. If it's actually, and I know that's a hard conversation, but I have to have it. So yes, this is what I'm saying. I'm actually saying, and so pardon me, doctor, because you're the one with the baby in your belly. But I'm actually saying, if that is actually a baby, a human baby inside of there, and I don't care, I'm willing to because I want to save all the babies, I'm willing to lose some of the babies. But I'm going to say, if that is literally a human being inside of her belly, then I'm sorry, I don't think she should have the right to kill it.
So I have to step in here because I want to hear from more students.
Okay.
But say, since we have invoked this fetus, that I have the big question is, well, what about me? Right? Like, what if it is the case that this fetus becomes a threat to my life? Do I deserve to live? And if we have to choose between me and the fetus, who gets to live?
Well, see, and that's the thing.
I happen to have resources that allow me to take care of this fetus. I happen to have resources that allow me to go to the store and buy snacks, right? Because it's hard to be pregnant. What do we do about women who can't afford to be pregnant, who find it too hard to be pregnant, who are sick, who are dying, who need a miscarriage, and so on?
So, and that's the thing. We talk about women who are, women whose lives are in threat. That's a very small fraction. And so but again, because I'm willing to, like, I want to save all the babies, so I'm willing to negotiate. But at some point,
This raises a really critical and important political issue about the composition of the Supreme Court and how we got to this place, right? Because when life begins and how we determine this constitutional right and personal liberty and due process, all of that was decided through years of precedent that the Supreme Court has summarily unwinded. And part of the reason why that was able to happen was because the Republicans have been surgical in making sure that we have that the nominees got to the bench and that their nominees would get all the way up to the Supreme Court. It was a strategy, right? And so
Absolutely.
I think the only thread that I think that we're going to be able to pull from this conversation, honestly, is the fact that our political power determining who is in office and who they nominate and whether or not those judicial nominees get ultimately to the Supreme Court is a strategy, and we need to take our place in helping to make sure that we have the representation that we want, including on the court.
So true to the Howard University student body, we have questions, lots of questions. And so I think what I'll do is ask you to ask your question and ask us to be brief. So that we can get to as many students as possible. So brief, like 25, 30 seconds brief. Cool?
Hello, my name is Keith Godin Jr. I'm a sophomore broadcast journalism major, sociology minor from Riviera Beach, Florida. First things first, I want to say thank you, lovely ladies, for having this talk. Now, I have two questions. My question number one is a little shallow to my question number two. So first question, how as individuals do you guys think that we can battle inflation?
I'm gonna go with Ms. Bass Williams here and tell you I'm not an economist, so I'm not entirely sure. Do you all have ideas about battling inflation?
you know, if it is a supply chain issue, I firmly believe that and the Biden administration is doing this in some places. I think that we need to be producing more things in America. If it is actually a supply chain issue, I think that this idea that we are having chips made in Taiwan, and now I just feel like we need to get back to our I'm older than most people in this room, but my grandparents' days when we were manufacturing and building stuff here. But I'm not an economist. I have no idea.
And I'm going to say that I think we will see some of the legislation that was recently passed start to take effect in ways that help that are inflation reductionary. But I think our best effort is placed at voting people in office that actually care about reducing it.
Thank you. Now my second question, right? My thing with this Roe v. Wade being overturned, it doesn't stop the abortions. It just makes them more unsafe for everybody. But we all have discussed that the biggest marginalized group affected is Black women, right? Black women who don't have the money in order to support the baby or whatever. It made that abortion much more difficult and has risked the baby's and the mother's life. Do you feel that America is ready to accept the casualties of that?
I believe that when America begins to put, first of all, we're overlooking crisis pregnancy centers in that community, and I think that because I believe that it is life, I'm sorry, I'm going to die on my hill of life, and so because I believe it's life, we have to be ready for it. Some people say that it's better, and Stacey Abrams, even on, recently she hasn't walked back this idea that, inflation reduction happens when we're able to abort our babies. I'm like, I'm sorry, that's not a train that I'm going to ride.
There's no way that she said that. Inflation reduction happens when we're able to abort our, there's no way that she said that.
She very much said, on MSNBC on Morning Joe, and what I want to do is make sure that we have the clip. So tonight when I get home, I'm going to put the clip at justreadthedamnbill.com, where she actually talks about, and she doesn't walk it back. She actually talks about one of the reasons that we have inflation is that mothers are, and I'm not going to use her exact words, but the conversation, she was asked, what are we going to do about inflation? And her response, shockingly, was, if mothers are able to abort their babies, that is an economic issue. And she actually said it. And I'm going to put the clip up when I get in my sister's car where she said it. That is exactly what she said. I mean, that is not, but that was the conversation. She was asked about inflation, and she said people, if they can abort their babies. I'm going to be 25 seconds, sorry.
Hello everyone, my name is Tyler Woods. I'm a freshman international business major and I'm from Louisville, Kentucky. And my question is for you. I'm also a believer, but it goes back to, I'm sure you read the Bible and I'm sure you've seen where it says like God gives us free will. So my thing is you might do things in your household but you think it's fine, but then again it's like, where do you feel like we have the power to put that on other people? Like, why do you feel as a believer where God loves everybody, and regardless, we can't say, for you can't push your beliefs on other people.
That's exactly what I said. I said, my family, we believe this, but
right.
I have to go in the public square and argue this from a secular point of view.
But why do you believe that it's okay for you to do so?
No, I don't believe that it's okay for me to force my biblical beliefs on anyone in this room. So I don't ever take this abortion argument from my view as a Christian. I believe that I am fearfully and wonderfully made. God knew me from my mother's womb. That is what my family believes. But I'm not going to force anyone to take my religious beliefs. So I have to argue. I'm not a scientist, but I have to argue this from life, from the issue of life. So let's say I'm an atheist. Let's say I'm I have whatever faith. I believe that it's life, and I'm not using my Christian views to argue that it's life. I'm using like science to argue that it's life. So I don't want to force my Christian views on anyone.
Right. So do you believe that so would you be like pro-life or pro-choice?
I am clearly very, very pro-life.
So I think maybe what the student is trying to suggest is that it's clear that you make this argument from a secular position, but if I am Jewish, and I believe that life begins when the child leaves the birth canal, how is it the case that your views end up leaving your faith and leaving your secular position in order to influence what I do in my house separately?
Right, see, but my views are that it is at conception. But I believe that at some point we as a community have to determine that we have to determine when it is life. And I am willing to be a part of the public square and a part of the discourse to come to that. But I definitely don't believe that it is at 9 months. That's the only time we can begin to protect it. So I don't use, I have no shame in my game. I'm a Christian, but I don't believe in forcing my Christian views on anyone.
But a national ban on abortion would force that perspective, or a perspective that prevents the right of a person to make that choice.
It's not necessarily their faith view, though.
For sure. Okay, that's chill.
Hi, thank you all for your time. My name is Lauren Walston. I'm a sophomore TV and film major from Colesville, Maryland, and I'm minoring in business administration. So my question also is relating to the Roe v. Wade issue. I'm curious as to what is the Republican Party's, I don't know, what's the word? Republicans are very vocal on being pro-life as opposed to pro-choice, but I'm just curious as to if there's a bill or any resources or plans or actions that the Republican Party has in order to help women who would be forced to have.
Absolutely, and Republicans certainly believe in empowering women through everything from crisis pregnancy centers to empowering faith communities to support women. Some people say, there is this argument that, Republicans, does it mean inflating like social programs? If that's the case, then I think that you would find that there are more Republicans who would be willing to support and some sort of expansion of actual crisis pregnancy support. And if states are making decisions to end abortion, then they'll have to. But I don't think that. But to me, it's not this blanket that Republicans just want people to have babies and have them live in poverty. I don't believe that at all. Can I point to exact legislation? No, but I can definitely point to support of organizations like crisis pregnancy centers and pulling funds away from organizations like Planned Parenthood.
Okay,
Ms. Beverly, I think it will probably be the case that Democrats take a different view. That Democrats might assume that it would be necessary to have a safety net. Do I have that right, or do you have something that you think might help the student understand the other perspective?
Absolutely. So there has been our long-standing debate between the Democratic and Republican Party is about the extent of which there should be a social safety net for low-income and families and marginalized communities, whether or not the social safety net is too bloated, whether or not welfare should be something that families should be able to access, whether or not it should be reduced. And so I find it striking, the idea of there being crisis pregnancy centers, but forcing women to be in the crisis in the first place and not providing any resources or support for them, or providing any resources or support for the baby as well after the baby is born, or early childhood education, all of those things that help to create life opportunities for a child as they are growing up. Those are the things that tend to be on the chopping block under Republican regimes.
Thank you. We have time for one more question.
All right. Hello, my name is Benny. I'm a sophomore, and I'm a software engineering major. And I have a question specifically for you, ma'am.
Please make it not be about Roe v. Wade.
It is.
Oh,
I'm sorry, but I have to. So as you said, the Republicans have made no secret about their hatred for Roe v. Wade since the 80s, you said. And so my question is, I don't remember, but I read that when Obama was in office, when he first came in office in 2008, he had a majority in the Senate and House.
Yeah.
And he had a chance to codify it, but he didn't. So now what's giving you hope that if we go and elect and vote in the midterm that Biden would codify it this time? Because he was part of the same administration. So.
Exactly, but he just made an announcement about 2 weeks ago. He got a lot of flack for it. He made an announcement about 2 weeks ago saying that he would make it a priority to codify Roe v. Wade.
Obama also made an announcement as well.
Pardon me?
Obama made an announcement as well.
No, he may have mentioned it on the campaign. I actually don't remember him saying that at all, ever. But I do know for certain that Biden did say that just a couple of weeks ago, and actually got a lot of flack from the political punditry because he was on The Message talking to us about abortion rights and about healthcare and reproductive rights at a time when people thought that the messaging should switch to attacks on our democracy and to the economy.
And I want to note, just kind of as a professor in the room, that presidents don't pass laws, legislatures do. And so if you are watching this, or if you're in the audience and you are worried about how to get something done, you probably want to start with thinking about the legislature. And so what I take Joe Biden to be saying is that if a bill comes to my desk and it supports the codification or the creation of a law that says abortion is a right, then I will sign that law. Or maybe he's saying I will go to the Hill and try to use my resources in order to make it the case that this thing passes. But there's nothing he can personally do in order to make it the case that this is the law. Our government doesn't work that way. He can execute laws, but he can't make them. And so that's a plug for the importance of voting all the way down your ballot, not just for The executive, I also always have to make the plug for voting at your state and local level. Most of the things that you experience on a day-to-day basis, whether you got here on a bus or whether you got here in a car, when you woke up and brushed your teeth this morning, what the quality of the water was coming out of that sink is about your local politics. So you want to make sure that you take the time to understand your local issues and participate in those elections as well, because people are making decisions every day about your life. That's about our time for today. So Ms. Beverly, Ms. Bass-Williams, Dr. Best, thank you so much for joining us at Howard University in the studios of WHUT today. Thank you also to the staff of WHUT, Calvin Hadley, and the Office of the President and the Provost as well, to help organize this conversation. I wish you all health and happiness. Until next time, have a great evening.